All right. So let me just say this. Over the next few weeks, I'm thinking probably about 3 weeks, but over the next couple of weeks here, we're going to be looking at sections of the laws that are found in Exodus. We're not going to go through and be reading and talking about all of them in detail. So we're not going to look at every aspect of all the laws. This is going to be more of a survey that we're going to kind of do with this. And we're going to do the same thing with the tabernacle. There's multiple chapters that have a lot to do with the laws. They have a lot to do with the tabernacle and the building of it and things like that. I want to encourage you that if you have the time to go and read the whole book of Exodus, read through it all. But for our Wednesday night study, it's going to be more of a survey style. There's certainly times to delve into it and go in depth and detail, but for what we do on Wednesday nights, I don't believe that it would be great for us to look at all the minute details. But we will look at the laws here over the next probably 3 weeks. And we're going to look at them kind of in summary fashion and just look at some of the maybe some of the bigger things that are found there. But again, take the time, read through it all, and I think you'll be blessed by doing that. So with that being said, let me ask this. What do you think of when you hear the word slave or slavery? What comes to mind?
Injustice.
Okay, injustice. What else?
Of one human being having dominion and ownership of another.
Okay, one human being having dominion and ownership of another. Who else? Somebody else is chiming in.
I was just saying oppression, where you force people into labor against their will.
Okay, oppression. I think some of the things that I kind of made note of as I was thinking about this question as well was I thought ungodly. You know, if you just think of this right off the bat, what comes to my mind in the 21st century is ungodly. I think racism, I think unjust, I think unfair, and I think wicked. And I think the things that we've talked about would all kind of slot into those categories. When we hear that word, when we think about that concept, it doesn't typically have a good ring to it. And I think we're all on the same page with that. All right, so we're going to look at Exodus chapter 21. We're going to look at verses 1 through 6 to begin. Hopefully we're going to look at a bunch of chunks of text this evening, but we're going to start with this chunk of text. So Exodus 21, 1 through 6 says this. It says, now, these are the rules that you shall set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th year, he shall go out free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to God. He shall bring him to the door of the doorposts, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. Okay. What strikes you about what God says concerning slaves and slavery in the section we just looked
at? What strikes me is that slaves, that if people have been slaves, can have a Hebrew slave.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
Okay, so the Hebrews who were slaves, they come out of slavery, and yet God is allowing them to have slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I hadn't even thought about that as I read through the text, and I was thinking about these questions, formulating these questions, and kind of trying to think deeply about this. I hadn't really thought about that, but that in some ways, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? That should be something that we should smack us in the face, kind of, right? That here are slaves who've come out of slavery, they're set free, and now they're allowed to have slaves. Yeah, that's kind of striking. That's maybe odd to us. What else? What else kind of jumps out at you?
The part that
Don't
jumps out at me
necessarily-
is, oh, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say, they don't necessarily strike us as fair as we read them in today's beliefs, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of almost doesn't sound like it would be a godly thing. I mean, we all said pretty much just that when we talked about it before we looked at the text, that, you know, when what comes to mind is slavery in our minds is unjust, unfair, ungodly, all those kinds of things. Yeah. Tim, go ahead.
Well, I may be reading into it the wrong way, but what the last part of it, if someone desires to remain a slave, I'm going back to that imagery of the doorpost and the cross and the piercing of the ear. It reminds me of Christ.
Okay. Okay.
And I don't know if that is a stretch there or if that's symbolism for a life of service.
Yeah. Well, this would definitely be a physical marking of a lifetime slave. Yeah. But, you know, kind of what you bring out there is, and, you know, I hadn't really thought about the possibility that there may be a connection to the cross. I wouldn't necessarily discount that right off the bat. I'd have to think about it. I'm not sure that that's a correct connection, but it might be. I'd have to think about that. Certainly give me something to think about. But, you know, the idea that someone might desire to stay a slave. I mean, does that strike you as strange? We think about slavery as unjust. We think about slavery as one person owning another. We think about it as a bad thing. And yet here, the potential of somebody saying, you know what, I want to be here. Now, in the context of what we read, he's got a family and he doesn't want to leave his family. And then there would be reasons why the person comes in either married and leaves married, or comes in alone and leaves alone, and those kinds of things. Won't necessarily get into all those details, but just the idea, I think that, you know, I don't think we think that a slave might want to stay a slave because of the concept of slavery we have in our minds. But that kind of struck me. What about the idea that it's not necessarily a lifetime thing? Slavery, according to what God is saying here, is not necessarily a lifetime thing. There was limits and regulations concerning slavery. What's the issue about the 7 years? What's God say about that?
Well, they were set free after 7 years, weren't they?
Yeah. How much did they have to pay for their freedom?
I didn't know they did.
Zero. Nada. Nothing. They go out. They don't have to pay anything. Again, when we think about slavery, this is not what comes to mind, because we have a perception because of what has happened in our culture, in our history, in the American history and Western society over the past 4, 5, 6, 700 years. A lot of it tended to be, or eventually became, especially in America, became racial. It was horrific. You didn't let your slaves go after 7 years. That was just, that wasn't a thing. So the idea that God has given these regulations, and that slaves, after they worked for this, you know, a number of years, they were to be set free. They were to go out free. So do we sometimes struggle with the fact that the Bible speaks of slavery and doesn't require the abolition of slavery. It doesn't require the removal of that from society. Do we struggle with that?
I do quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of people who will raise objections to the Bible's truthfulness, won't they? And one of the things they will point to is what? Slavery, right? A God that even in the New Testament, Jesus and all of that, nobody says get rid of slavery.
I think
So-
of Philemon.
Yes, that's right.
It's awkward to have a brother and a brother in Christ and a master and servant relationship.
Yeah, and we struggle with that. Absolutely.
Isn't
Go ahead.
this more like an indenturedness? I mean, I don't mean to belittle some of the terms or anything here, but when people either wanted to learn a trade or when people had no resources, had no money, didn't they indenture themselves to where they could build up a family like it describes here, where maybe it could be given a wife, be given a family, be given an opportunity to establish himself as a family, as a patriarch.
Yeah, this was the question that I was going to say. And so kind of, Tom, you're kind of anticipating this. And the idea is, do we appreciate that there are major differences between ancient slavery practices and biblical slavery? And of course, what our country went through. And I don't think we separate those at all times. Now, indentured servitude and things like that. Yes, that kind of thing happened in the ancient world, and there would be some overlap. But I don't know if I would. We certainly need to be careful, and there's certain classifications. We can make distinctions, but there was slavery, and not just indentured, servitude and things like that. But there was, it was what we would call slavery. But it wasn't, and I'm just talking in the ancient world. But yes, there's overlap, and there's this concept of, as you said, we don't appreciate the fact that somebody in the ancient world, if they were poor and struggling to pay the bills, would actually want to go into what was called slavery. They would not just, servitude, but they would sell themselves. This is a concept that they would literally sell themselves into slavery. And depending on what culture in the ancient world and what's being talked about, they were they may not necessarily be able to get free, or they would have to pay for their freedom, or maybe their master would just do them a wonderful blessing after 30, 40, 50 years of service, or whatever happened to them, and they would free them. But there was all these different concepts surrounding, and there was overlap between learning a trade, becoming a servant of someone, becoming an indentured servant, and becoming a slave. There was overlap and there was flow between all of this. But I'm not sure that we often appreciate the differences, and there are major differences. There's also an economic factor to all this. And again, some people wanted to be slaves. This was not a bad thing. And in fact, if we just think outside of the Bible, just in the ancient culture, all the way up through the New Testament and stuff, sometimes your slave was smarter than you. Sometimes your slave was a person of royal stature. Another kingdom got conquered. Where do you think they got slaves from? It wasn't a racial thing. It had nothing to do about ignorance or anything like that. You could have, your slave could be a whole lot smarter than you, and literate and all these things. Of course, there were slaves that worked in the mines that were chained and were harshly treated, and it had a range. But interesting about the differences between biblical slavery, at least what we're looking at here, and that there are major differences that between what we think of and what was going on back then. And of course, this goes all the way up through the New Testament, as Tim had mentioned. And when we read the New Testament and it talks about some of our translations will say servants, servants obey your masters and all that. That's the reason a lot of translations will say servants is because they are trying to remove the American concept of racial slavery and how you would mistreat people and that kind of thing. But they were slaves. Slaves obey your masters. It wasn't an employer-employee kind of concept, at least as we would think. These were often regarded as property. Again, treated differently depending on where they were being a slave. But yeah, it's something to chew on. It's something to chew on and think about. But I just want to bring that up because this is part of what the laws are about. It's regulating. It's regulating. Did you notice that? It's regulating slavery. If a person is in slavery, which was culturally a norm, people, there were slaves in the ancient world. They had to be regulated. There had to be fair treatment. Read through the rest of the laws about slaves and things, and you'll see those concepts. All right, we're going to read Exodus 21, 12 through 19. 12 through 19. And so we're reading further on here, and it says, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar, that he may die. Whoever strikes his father or mother shall be put to death. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. Now, we're not going to talk about that part right there, but that is connected back to what we talked about slavery. Notice what God says about that. Stealing of people and putting them into slavery. It's a little different concept in God's eyes. Whoever curses his father or mother shall be put to death. When men quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and the man does not die, but takes to his bed, and then if the man rises again and walks outdoors with his staff, he who struck him shall be clear, only he shall pay for the loss of his time and shall have him thoroughly healed. All right, so does God through Moses make a difference, make a distinction between different kinds of killing?
Seems so here.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we, in our culture, in our law system, do we make a differentiation between different kinds of killings?
Yes.
Penalty wise, we do.
Sure. What do we call it? Manslaughter? What's manslaughter? Is it first, second, or third degree? It's like first degree, third degree? Is it third degree? I forget how that works.
Yeah.
It's like the least, right? Third degree, I think, is the least. It's like manslaughter.
Like you're responsible for the death of someone without premeditation or doing it intentionally.
Yeah, and then of course there's second degree murder and then first degree murder, right? In our culture, in our society. Now I believe that many, if not all of our laws are based on the Bible. They're based on the Ten Commandments. They're based on what we find here in Exodus and other places. And so God makes a distinction, right? And so we can kind of look at it as God making a distinction between at least what we would call maybe manslaughter and what we would call maybe first degree murder, right? Doesn't he make that distinction there? He talks about if you kill a person, but it was unintentional, right? You didn't lie in wait for them. You weren't cunning. But interesting enough that God allowed that person. So that says something about God having control over life and death. But the idea that you weren't, a person wasn't there cunning. It wasn't premeditated, as I think, Tim, you were talking about premeditated murder. Maybe it was more of an accident. And that's what it sounds like, doesn't it? Like God is making a distinction between what we would call accidental murder and what we would call premeditated murder. The person was lying in wait for him, cunning. Is there a difference between motives of there's a difference, isn't there? You've got a person who's purposing to kill someone, to murder someone, and then you got a person, it's an accidental one. Maybe maybe in our society it would be, you know, a ball goes out in front of your car. What do you know is coming right after that ball?
A kid.
Yeah. Do children sometimes accidentally die by running out in the street and a car hitting them?
Yes.
Yeah, it's tragedy. It's, you know, nobody would say that's good or excuse that's horrible. But if the person in the car wasn't doing 80 miles an hour in a 20, or do you know what I mean? That like there was no fault. They didn't purpose to do this. It's an accident. That's different. That's a different motive than the person who plots and plans to have their husband or their wife murdered so that they can collect the insurance money, right? Two different things. You don't try those the same way, do you? Or do you? Do you try those the exact same way?
No.
No, of course not, right? And so God is, we see this here, that God is making a distinction. There's going to be a place of refuge for the person who does this accidentally. You know, that somebody dies, they kill somebody accidentally, there'll be a place for them to go, a safe haven. And then, of course,
James,
yeah.
there was a down in Texas, someplace, I think it was. There was a guy came into a church building with intent to kill a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And there was a guy there that had a gun with him. And he just turned around and fired and killed the guy that was going to kill a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And they said, how could you do that since the Bible says thou shalt not kill? And
Yeah.
he said, I didn't think of it as killing a person. I was killing evil, because a person that is doing that is doing evil, and I was putting a stop to evil.
Well, we could read the rest of the Old Testament. Of course, we could read the New Testament as well, and see that there is a distinction between the person who would go and kill, who would murder the image of God. God has no problem. Well, I should say he doesn't have a problem, but God sets the penalty for those who would attack the very image of God, and that's to be put to death. Capital punishment, but that's not murder. God doesn't. So the same word might be used, but remember, every word has a different meaning depending on context. It can have more than one meaning. And here we have the idea that God is making a distinction between that. So yeah, we make a distinction in our law system, and I believe we get that from the Bible. God makes a distinction. All killing is not the same. It's just not the same. Now, here's a question. Why do you think the penalty is so great for the person who would assault their father or mother? Because a person who strikes or assaults father or mother is to be put to death. Now, again, that's not murder. That would be putting that person to death. We talk about it being killing, but it's not the same as the person who lies in wait and cunning. This is punishment for striking father or mother. Why would that be? Why is it so harsh? What do you think?
If you do that to your parents, you'll do it to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. No respect for authority figures.
Yeah.
No respect for the closest to you. I mean, how much closer can you get than your father and mother? Now, if a person is willing to do that to the closest to them, I mean, is it likely that this person would have no respect for laws in general, authority figures in general?
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah, it's likely if a person is willing to abuse, strike, hurt the people closest to them, they very well could do a whole lot worse to people they don't know. If they're willing to do that to their parents, what will they do to the stranger if they get upset? So, yeah, we see that it's harsh, and it certainly is. It's very harsh if we look at it we think, well, maybe lock them up in the stocks or something like that. But of course, this is Israel who's wandering in the wilderness. They don't have a jail to put people in. And yeah, so it's harsh, but people who have no respect for authority in the home, and especially like this, are unlikely to have respect for God or other laws. So yeah, it's
That's what
harsh.
I was thinking about it in terms of that's how important God views relationship with authority, like his authority. And he's
Yes,
showing us, like, if you're not going to honor your father and mother, you're certainly not honoring me.
that's right. And remember
Very
that.
serious.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't hear that.
Well, and that is very serious.
Yes.
To not honor authority.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, we looked at the 10 Commandments, and what was one of the 10 Commandments?
Honor thy father and mother.
There you go. Honor your father and mother. If you do, it will go well with you. You live long in the land. Here we see the opposite side of that. Okay, time is getting away from us, so let's see if we can press on a little further here. We're going to look at Exodus 22, 1 through 4. 22, 1 through 4 says, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it's an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. All right. So now obviously we're talking about theft. And what jumps out at you at that when it talks about theft? What's one of the things or some of the things that kind of jump out at you?
Where was that? I didn't catch.
Exodus 22, 1 through 4. I know we're
I think
jumping.
it's restitution is the thing that jumps out at us.
Okay. Restitution.
Doing what's honorable, what's fair, what's proper.
Yeah. Well, why do you think if a person steals somebody's animal, ox and sheep are just used as an example, it's anything, right? Steals their animal, kills it or sells it, that they're to pay him 5 for the one or 4 for the one if it's a sheep, versus just paying paying double? Why so much if the person kills and sells it? Or what do you think about that?
A lesson to be learned.
Big lesson to be learned. Financial lesson to be learned, right? Yeah, making money off of it, right? You sell it, you're making money off of it. If you kill it, you're probably eating it. So you're it's not just that you have it in your possession, and you pay double, but now you're trying to make, you're making money off of it, and you're not going to make money off of it. God is going to make sure that you pay. You're probably not going to get 5 times worth an ox or 4 times worth of sheep, if you sell it or something like that. So yeah, there's definitely a lesson to be learned. Why does God make a difference between someone someone being killed when stealing at night versus in the daytime?
If they break into my house at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't see or what's going on. But if it's 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning when they break in, I can see who it is and better defend myself. Maybe, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Good thought. Anybody else?
I think the night carries, fear, like what Mike was saying. I could wake up disoriented and confused and very scared of what's going on and act in the darkness
Mm,
fighting for my life. I don't know I don't know intent. I don't know
yeah.
maybe everything that's going on. Whereas in the light of day, the light, I can discern what's going on much better. And yeah, as Mike said, I can see who it is. They're going to see me too.
Yeah.
It just seems different.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys kind of hit the major points there. You know, at night you have less ability to see what's going on. You don't know if the person is trying to kill you or just steal from it. You don't know. Are they trying to, rape your wife or your children, or like, you don't know. I have no clue what's going on. You wake up.
It could be a family member that's coming in late or something.
You just don't know. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
you don't know what's going on. Yeah. It's scary. I mean, let's be honest. Middle of the night, darkness, somebody's coming in, stealing. It's a thief, in the context here. It's a thief. Somebody's trying to steal from you, but it's scary. You don't know what's going on. Heart's racing. What is going on here? In the day, as was said, you can see the person. You can see if they're armed. You can see maybe what their intent is. So you can discern the situation. It's not catching you off guard, at least as much. There's light on the situation. Different psychological mindset between night and day. Just kind of is. Do we have similar things in our laws? Are there distinctions between a thief coming in and robbing, getting killed in the process, inside your home or outside your home, or in the day or in the night? Are there differences even in our law system today?
Yes.
Yeah. Am I correct? I don't know. Maybe this was just a Massachusetts thing.
I think if they're in your house, I've heard different things. If they're in your house and you shoot, you're okay. If they're outside your house and they're breaking in, it might be different. I don't know.
I've heard that too. Does anybody know definitively for sure if that's the case?
In the state of Missouri, if they have purple paint on their boundary, you better not go in there because you're fair game.
Purple paint. What does the purple paint indicate?
No trespassing.
So if purple paint is not on your boundaries and somebody goes in, it's different legally?
Yes.
Oh,
Unless
okay.
you have a no trespassing sign up, and
Okay.
it needs to be frequent enough that at any place where they would enter, they would have ability to see the purple paint.
Okay. All right. I didn't know that. But I had always heard what Mike said as well. If the person's in your home and you shoot them, then you're covered by the law. If they're outside and you shoot them, it's different. They haven't come in and whatever. And again, that may or may not be 100% accurate, but I do, as Paul said, there's definitely a distinction here made with at least the purple paint concept. So yeah, I mean, I think again we get these modern laws primarily, I think, from the Old Testament and from the laws there that we find in Exodus and Ten Commandments, things like that. And God is making a distinction. God is making a distinction between these things and attempting to create a community that is holy. At the end of the day, the laws and the requirements that God is going through here, he's attempting to make a holy nation. What's the ultimate purpose of the nation of Israel?
To bring Jesus into the world.
That's right. The nation of Israel is a vehicle to bring the Messiah into the world to bless the world. And so they need to be a holy nation. Now, they fail at many different points, at many different times, but the laws and the system that God has put into effect is meant to do that. It's meant to make them holy and separate, and they are not to be like the nations around them, doing all kinds of different evils and stuff. So God is trying to create a people that have a respect for him, a respect for one another, right? Isn't it love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself? And we're seeing a description of the Ten Commandments being played out with these expansions, really the expansions on the two laws that Jesus says, the two greatest laws or commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we're just seeing this play out in the different laws, treating of slaves and treating of father and mother and the treating of neighbor. And I mean, all of this we can kind of slot into the 10 Commandments, can't we? Honor your father and mother. Don't steal or covet your neighbor's things. Don't murder. All of these things go back to that. And then Jesus says they go back to the 2. All right. We are at the point of less than a minute. So we did get through all of that tonight. Wonderful conversation. God bless each of you. Thank you for participating. I'm going to attempt to pray and then we'll shut this down.